I want to start by saying I don't scare is. I grew up in a house with a mum who worked night shifts, so I was alone a lot as a kid, and somewhere along the way I just stopped being afraid of empty rooms and creaking floors. I tell you that because I need you to understand that what happened to me at that hotel in October wasn't me being paranoid or overreacting. I've replayed it so many times since then, looking for the moment where I could have just been imagining things, and I can't find it. Every single detail checks out. Every single detail still makes my skin crawl. I was driving from Ohio to see my sister in Nashville. A trip I'd done maybe 4 or 5 times before. Usually, I break it up with a stop somewhere around Louisville, because 8 hours straight is too much for me, especially at night. This time, I left later than planned. Some work thing dragged on. And by the time I hit the Kentucky border, it was already past 9, and I was running on gas station coffee and adrenaline. I told myself I'd push through to Louisville and find something cheap near the highway. The place I found was one of those independent motels. Not a chain, the kind with a sign that's missing a letter or two, and a parking lot that's more pothole than pavement. Normally, I'd have kept driving, but I was exhausted in that specific way where your eyes start doing this thing. This heavy blinking thing where you genuinely don't trust yourself behind the wheel anymore. So I pulled in. The front desk guy was maybe 60, heavy-set, wearing a cardigan that looked older than me. He had the television on behind the counter, some rerun with the volume low, and he barely looked up when I came in. I remember thinking that was normal. You don't expect enthusiasm from a guy working the night desk at a roadside motel in October. He took my card, gave me a room on the 2nd floor, room 214, and told me the ice machine was broken. Like that was the only warning worth giving a stranger checking in alone at 10 at night. The room was fine. Not great, but fine. Worn carpet, a bedspread with a pattern that had probably seen better decades. But the sheets looked clean, and the door had both a deadbolt and one of those swing bar locks, which I always check because my dad drilled that into me years ago. I remember locking both of them, dropping my bag on the chair by the window, and just sitting on the edge of the bed for a minute, doing that thing where you're too tired to move but too wired to sleep yet. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, almost nothing, like something had been cleaned recently but not quite well enough. Not blood, nothing that dramatic, just this underlying sourness beneath the bleach. I didn't think much of it at the time. Motels smell weird. That's just a fact of motel life. I showered, brushed my teeth, and got into bed around 11. I remember checking my phone, texting my sister that I'd be a few hours later than planned tomorrow, and then just letting my eyes close. I want to be honest, I fell asleep fast. Whatever was building in that room, I didn't feel it yet. That came later. I woke up at what I later confirmed was 1:47 in the morning, and I want to describe exactly what woke me up because it matters. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the opposite. It was this specific kind of silence, the kind that feels wrong. The kind where your body understands something before your brain catches up. You know how sometimes you wake up and you just know someone is in the room with you before you've even opened your eyes. That, I laid there completely still, eyes barely cracked open, listening. And then I heard it, breathing, not mine. Slow, careful breathing, like someone was trying very hard to keep it quiet and controlled, coming from somewhere near the closet, which was maybe 8 feet from the bed. I want to tell you, I did something brave in that moment, but I didn't. I froze. Every part of me went rigid. and I just laid there staring at the sliver of the room I could see through my barely open eyes, trying to figure out if I was imagining this, if it was the pipes, if it was the guy in the next room, anything other than what my gut was already telling me. The breathing stopped, and then I heard a sound I will never forget for as long as I live, a soft, deliberate scrape, like fabric dragging against carpet, moving toward the bed. I don't remember deciding to scream. I just remember doing it, throwing myself off the far side of the bed at the same time, putting the mattress between me and whatever was in that room, and scrambling for the door with my heart doing something I didn't know hearts could physically do. I got the deadbolt open, the swing bar off, and I was out in the hallway in maybe 4 seconds, still screaming, in a t-shirt and boxers, no shoes. Nothing. The hallway light was this sick fluorescent yellow, and I remember standing there under it, shaking so hard my teeth were actually chattering, and looking back at my door, which I'd slammed behind me. It didn't open. Nobody came out after me. For a second, I actually started to doubt myself, started to wonder if I'd dreamed the whole thing, if exhaustion had just conjured up a nightmare so real it felt like waking life. Then the door across the hall opened, and a woman in her pajamas stuck her head out, annoyed, asking what the hell was going on. I must have looked completely unhinged, because her expression changed fast, from annoyance to something closer to concern. I told her, in this shaky, half-coherent way, that someone was in my room. She told me to come inside, and I did, and she called down to the front desk while I sat on the end of her bed, trying to remember how to breathe normally. The guy from the front desk, the same cardigan guy, came up maybe 5 minutes later with a young woman I hadn't seen before, who I later learned was the overnight housekeeping supervisor. I want to be clear about what happened next, because this is the part that still gets me. The front desk guy didn't dismiss me. He didn't do that thing where an adult tells a scared person they probably just had a nightmare. He looked at me for a second, and something in his face changed. This kind of grim recognition, like he'd been half expecting a call like this. He asked me very specifically, not if I saw someone, but if I heard breathing near the closet. I said yes, and I watched him and the housekeeping woman exchange this look, this loaded, unspoken look that made my stomach drop even further. They didn't open my door right away. He got on his radio and called someone. I don't know who, maybe a manager, maybe security. I couldn't hear the whole exchange, but I heard him say the word again, just once. Low, like it slipped out before he could stop it. That word has stayed with me. Again they had me wait with the woman across the hall while 2 men, the front desk guy and someone else who arrived a few minutes later in street clothes, not a uniform, went to my room. I heard them knock, announce themselves, and then there was this stretch of silence that felt like it lasted forever. Then I heard the door open, and I heard one of them say something I couldn't make out, followed by a long pause, and then footsteps, fast. Someone moving with real urgency. The housekeeping woman came back to get me a few minutes after that. She wouldn't tell me exactly what they found. What she did tell me, and I remember this word for word because I've thought about it every day since, was that I needed to go stay in a different room for the night, that the police were on their way, and that she was very glad I'd woken up when I did. I asked her straight out if someone had actually been in my room. She hesitated, this long pause where I could see her deciding how much to say, and then she just said, quietly, that there was a gap behind the closet panel that led into the maintenance corridor between rooms, and that it looked like someone had been using it, not just that night, but for a while, I didn't sleep again that night. They put me in a room on the first floor near the office, and an actual police officer came and took my statement around 3 in the morning. He was polite, but careful with his questions in a way that made it clear this wasn't the first time he'd been called to that particular building. He asked me things like whether I'd noticed anyone watching me check in, whether I'd left my curtains open at any point, whether I'd told anyone at the front desk what time I'd planned to go to sleep. Small, specific questions that only make sense if you're building a picture of a pattern. I left the next morning without really getting an explanation. Just a refund on the room and a business card from the officer, in case I remembered anything else. I called my sister from the parking lot before I even started driving, and I just sat there telling her everything while staring at the second floor window of room 214, which from the outside looked like nothing, like any other window in any other cheap motel in America. It took me almost 3 weeks to find out what actually happened. And I only found out because I couldn't let it go, because I needed to know, because not knowing was somehow worse than any answer could have been. I called the local police non-emergency line, gave them the case number from my statement, and eventually got connected to a detective who was willing to tell me a little more than the responding officer had that night. Mostly, I think, because I'd been a direct witness and it was technically part of an active case at that point. There was a man, a former maintenance employee who'd been fired from the motel almost a year earlier, but had apparently kept a set of keys and knew every inch of that building, including the old service corridor that ran behind several rooms on the second floor. A leftover from when the building had been something else decades ago, some kind of boarding house, before it became a motel. He'd been using that access point to enter occupied rooms at night while guests slept, standing near the closet, sometimes for as long as an hour, before leaving the same way he came in. The detective told me, carefully, that in at least 2 other confirmed instances, guests hadn't woken up at all, and he didn't need to say anything more than that for me to understand exactly what he meant. I asked why nobody had shut down that corridor after the first time it happened, and there was this uncomfortable pause before he said something about the owner being slow to authorize the repair work, about corners being cut, about how these things sometimes take longer to fix than they should. I think about the front desk guy in the cardigan more than I think about almost anything else from that night. I think about the fact that he recognized what was happening the second I said the word breathing, that he didn't waste even 30 seconds doubting me, that he and that housekeeping supervisor moved with this quiet, practiced urgency that told me, even in the moment, that they'd been dreading exactly this call for a long time. I don't know their names. I never got the chance to properly thank either of them, not really, not in the way that moment deserved. All I know is that if that man at the front desk had been even a little slower, a little more dismissive, a little more willing to write off a stranger's scream in the middle of the night, I don't think I'd be telling you this story right now. I still can't sleep in hotel rooms with closets near the bed. I know how that sounds. I know it probably sounds like a small, manageable thing compared to everything else, but it's the detail that stayed with me the hardest, that specific geography. The distance between where I was lying and where he was standing, listening to me breathe, waiting for something I still don't like to think about. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep somewhere unfamiliar, I catch myself listening the way I listened that night, waiting for that particular silence, the wrong kind, the kind that means you're not alone anymore. I don't know what happened to that man after they arrested him. I never followed up that far. Some part of me didn't want to know his name, Didn't want to give him that kind of permanence in my memory. I just wanted him to stay what he was in my mind that night. A sound in the dark, a breath near the closet, a shape I never actually saw and never had to. But every October, when the air starts turning cold the way it did that night, I think about that hallway, that sick yellow light, and the sound of footsteps moving fast toward my room after a silence that felt like it would never end.